The Fairly OddParents is a show I think we can all agree only works in animation. The general format is that Timmy makes a fantastical wish that ultimately blows up in his face, having Christmas every single day, and having all the other holidays declare a vendetta against Santa is the stupid nonsense we live for in animation. And of course, one of Cosmo and Wanda's previous godchildren plunged the world into World War I. Yes, that happened. So it baffled me when they announced a live-action sequel series back in the day. Timmy keeping his fairies until he's 18, I can buy. Timmy getting into Princeton, I can also buy. Somehow. Timmy handing over his fairies to a younger cousin, I can also buy. The problem is that they want to do a live-action animation hybrid on a serious budget crunch. Let's compare the openings, specifically the bits where they're making a bunch of wishes. In the original, you can get away with Timmy making a bunch of weird wishes, such as turning Vicky obtuse into a rubber or a green moose, among other things. Live action doesn't have that. I mean, let's go through what all the Fairly Otter cast wish for in their opening. A new shirt, a blue skirt, dessert. Yeah, not particularly convinced here. This show is also produced by Christopher J. Novak, who is also probably most known for Danger Force, the Henry Danger sequel series. Same guy also spent the first 4 episodes of season 2 trying to chase an Among Us trend. Yes, seriously. That's sad. And that's not even getting into the characters of the show. This is Vivian Turner. Vivian is the average girl who no one understands. My problem with her is that I don't think the show depicts her well at all. They don't depict her as being miserable. Sure, she has a new stepbrother and is moving to Dimsdale, which is full of wacky people, but miserable isn't an adjective I would use to describe her. She's far too normal. Compare that to the more over-the-top misery Timmy had to endure. Like, I don't think Vivian works. Perhaps this is because being a live-action adaptation makes it not work. Some things are simply more acceptable in a cartoon than they are in live action. You can go crazy with Crocker's over-the-top antics for failing kids. Vicky with a chainsaw is more acceptable in a cartoon. Could you imagine that in live action? That would be freaking terrifying. The fact that in a cartoon you can have her have antics with the chainsaw that you can't get away with in live action, because in live action, the idea of someone chasing someone else with a chainsaw is immediately more creepy and less acceptable, because after all, even Looney Tunes had the whole chainsaw gags, and we've sort of had that in our popular consciousness for quite some time. It's a bit harder to show human misery that's over the top and not just plain creepy. In a cartoon setting, not so much. Even human misery in a live action setting might hit way too close to home, which isn't something you want in a fun, whimsical kids show. What about her stepbrother, Roy? What about him? I feel like the direction they just gave his actor was scream lines into the void, hoping to emulate more cartoony nature of the show. It just makes him come off as having the inability to act. Also, why does Roy need fairies? The opening describes him as a local star. I get that stars can be miserable, but there's very little to indicate that he is miserable in this. I get the intention was to make Roy play the clown to Vivian's straight man, but here's the thing. You can have a straight man and still not have the same standard sitcom tropes we've seen 1,000 times. You can have the clown and not just have him be over the top all the time. Honestly, Vivian should have been more like Squidward, and have her moments to just pretty much go all out crazy. You don't really get that with this show. Honestly, this dynamic could work in a cartoon. Roy is loud, impulsive, selfish, and doesn't think things through, and is reflected by the short-sightedness of his wishes. Vivian is quiet, reserved, and more selfless than Roy, but she still does have her streak of selfishness, such as wanting popularity, though generally her wishes try to help other people. Wait, where have I seen this before? Oh. Oh no. This dynamics is dead on arrival. The only character I legit liked in comparison to the rest of the cast was Vicky. Vicky is now a teacher. Why is she a teacher? Well, she wanted to torment a new generation of kids, which I absolutely believe she would do. If you don't believe that there are teachers out there who would take this job just to harm others because it gives them the opportunity to harm others, I'd like to introduce you to engineering professors. She also has a crush on Crocker. Ew. I still somehow hate her the least amount of everyone. That's how bad the show is. This show clearly does not have a budget for anything. They can't even afford a gym, preferring to use green screens of Roy dunking a basketball into a hoop because they can't afford extras in the stands or even the rental fees for a middle school basketball gym. Buddy, I've rented gyms before on behalf of other organizations. Some of them are cheap as hell. Then again, I think that maybe wherever the show is, it's not cheap as hell, but still. There are plenty of examples of this show being cheap. When Vicky is bitten by a dog in one episode, you can clearly see that the dog is a stuffed animal. You would really think that camera work would be used to cleverly convey that this is an actual dog and not a stuffed animal, but nope. Then there's the fairies. The fairies are barely in this. Cosmo and Wanda are barely in this because of budgetary concerns, and well, their animation is cheap as hell. Honestly, I want to know who the target audience is. Is this for the people who watch the original? Because I think they would be rather watching the original rather than the cheap-looking sequel. I doubt kids will watch this because of how cheap it is, because the cheapness pretty much stymies any creativity, and you're not even doing art from adversity and making the most out of it. You're just going through the numbers as if you had a higher budget, but are trying to hide the fact that you had a low budget rather than working within your means. As much as I make fun of Henry Danger, at least it had a budget. At least they could afford an actual gym, or at least a convincing looking set. My unprofessional opinion is that Paramount Plus needed to have more content, so they basically sped up Fairly Odder into production in order to give themselves more content for their streaming service. This show is boring as sin. The characters are boring, the animation is poor, there are paper-thin plots, and it is cheap without any charm to it. It can't justify having the Fairly OddParents brand on it because they are such afterthoughts throughout this whole thing. Bottom line, do not watch this show. Please consider liking, subscribing, tipping the channel on Ko-fi. This is Cyril signing off.